World War III, The Invasion, Chapter 1. Rising Tensions. The Situation Room smelled faintly of burnt coffee and recycled air. Screens glowed in the dim light, showing satellite images of the Pacific, radar tracks, and a scrolling ticker of intercepted communications. President Elaine Grant rubbed her temples as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Marcus Harlow, spoke in his gravelly voice. Madam President, it's not just maneuvers. Satellite imagery confirms at least 6 carrier strike groups mobilized in the Western Pacific. We're talking about sustained readiness, fuel tankers, amphibious assault ships, troop transports. This isn't a drill. The Secretary of State leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. We've seen bluffs before. They saber-rattle every election cycle. Why would this time be different? Harlow's eyes flicked toward the real-time feed of satellite photos. The red silhouettes of naval formations filled the screen. Because they're not just mobilizing ships. We're seeing mass cyber-probing of our power grid, drone incursions near Guam, and large-scale joint exercises with Russian and Iranian forces. This is coordinated. Someone's preparing for a long war. The room fell silent. The word war hung in the air like poison. Meanwhile, at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam, Lieutenant Commander Jason Ryder studied sonar returns with growing unease. The Los Angeles-class submarine USS Toledo had reported unusual activity. Foreign submarines shadowing U.S. carrier groups in patterns that were too disciplined to be mere reconnaissance. Ryder's executive officer muttered, "Feels like they're rehearsing the opening move." Ryder didn't disagree. In Warsaw, a different scene played out. Russian armored brigades had been massing on the border for weeks, under the guise of defensive training. NATO intelligence knew better. Satellite photos revealed forward-deployed Iskander missile systems and freshly constructed supply depots. Polish intelligence officers quietly told their American counterparts that it was only a matter of time. Moscow was preparing a lightning strike into the Baltics. In Shanghai, a closed-door meeting convened inside the Central Military Commission. Marshals stood before a massive wall map of the Pacific. Red arrows stabbed across the ocean toward Hawaii, Alaska, and the west coast of the United States. The lead marshal spoke in clipped Mandarin. America is fractured, overextended, and divided. Their allies question their resolve. The time is coming when we no longer play defense. We bring the war to them. No one in the room objected. Back in Washington, a National Security Council analyst named Claire Donovan noticed a chilling pattern in the data stream pouring across her desk. Stock market fluctuations, anonymous cyber attacks on U.S. banks, a blackout in San Diego traced to malware of foreign origin. She wrote a single line in her daily report, underlined twice. Indicators point toward deliberate destabilization of the homeland. When her supervisor skimmed the report, he muttered, "Let's hope you're wrong." The first dominoes were tipping. The alliances were hardening. Within weeks, the world would plunge into a conflict unlike anything in human history. And for the first time in over 2 centuries, the U.S. homeland itself would face invasion. Chapter 2. The Spark. The night it began, the world barely noticed. At 2:17 local time, a freighter flagged under Liberia drifted into the port of Los Angeles. Its manifest listed automotive parts from Shenzhen. The Coast Guard scanned it, found nothing irregular, and cleared it for docking. At 2:43, as cranes unloaded containers, the freighter's hull split in 3 simultaneous explosions. A plume of fire tore across the harbor. Within minutes, automated systems detected weaponized malware piggybacking through the port's network, spreading into the wider U.S. logistics grid. Across the nation, freight trains stopped. Gas pipelines shut down. Communications jammed in major metropolitan areas. The cyber war had begun. At the same moment, in the Baltic Sea, Russian missile batteries fired a coordinated barrage. Kaliningrad lit up the sky with launches. Within minutes, NATO radar in Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia was blinded. Armored brigades rolled across the borders under the cover of electronic silence. Polish forces scrambled, but Russian tanks were already pushing deep into the Suwalki Gap. NATO's most vulnerable corridor was collapsing. By dawn in Washington, D.C., the Situation Room was chaos. General Harlow barked across the table, his voice barely audible over the flood of updates. Confirmed detonations in Los Angeles and Long Beach. Multiple oil refineries offline in Texas. Our satellites show ballistic launches from Kaliningrad. European Command is requesting immediate reinforcements. The Secretary of State snapped, "We can't reinforce Europe and defend the homeland at the same time." President Grant stood, slamming her hand against the table. "Then we prioritize the homeland. Deploy Cyber Command to maximum readiness. Ground all civilian flights. Initiate DEFCON 2. The room went cold. DEFCON 2 meant one step below nuclear war. Meanwhile, at Pearl Harbor, sonar operators aboard the USS Toledo picked up a flurry of signatures. Multiple submarines. Too many. Contact. Bearing 240. 2 contacts. Correction. For contacts. Commander Ryder stared at the sonar plot. Whoever they were moving in tight wolfpack formation. The kind of maneuver you only made when war was already certain. At Guam, Marines on Anderson Air Force Base barely had time to react. Hypersonic missiles streaked from the stratosphere, slamming into runways, fuel depots, and hangars. Fireballs erupted as B-2 bombers burned on the tarmac before they could launch. A young corporal shouted into a headset as comms went down, "We're blind. We're." The feed cut to static. By 8 o'clock Eastern Time, the President of the United States addressed the nation. Her face was pale, her voice steady but grim. "My fellow Americans, we are under attack. This is not a drill, not an isolated incident. Our forces are engaged overseas, and hostile actions have been taken against our homeland. We will endure, we will fight, and we will prevail." Millions watched in stunned silence, clutching their phones, unaware that the worst was still to come. Because even as she spoke, foreign strike groups were already steaming eastward across the Pacific, their decks stacked with landing craft and aircraft. For the first time since 1812, the United States itself was the prize. Chapter 3. The First Strikes. By dawn, the United States was reeling. At Fort Bragg, paratroopers scrambled to deploy as news of simultaneous attacks poured in from the Pacific, the Gulf Coast, and the Midwest. Brigadier General Nathan Calloway barked into his radio, "All units defend key infrastructure nodes, airports, fuel depots, communications hubs. Enemy assets may be in the country already. I want eyes on every highway, rail line, and power substation." But even as he spoke, the first wave of cyber attacks crippled the power grid. Atlanta flickered into darkness. Dallas traffic control system ground to a halt. New York City's stock exchanges froze mid-trade. Automated signals sent trains careening off tracks. At Los Angeles, Navy SEALs moved toward the smoldering harbor. Smoke choked the skyline as port cranes collapsed in flames. Fires raged across container stacks. Explosions continued to erupt, triggered remotely by embedded explosives in shipping containers. Lieutenant Jenna Morales radioed her team. "We've got multiple hostiles on the waterfront. Intelligence says they're special operations units embedded within civilian cargo. Expect resistance. Expect casualties." They advanced under fire, dodging debris and secondary explosions. Morales' heart pounded, not just from the chaos, but from the knowledge that this was the invasion of American soil. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Air Force cyber operators worked frantically to repel an incoming missile strike. Screens flashed red. An unidentified hypersonic missile was closing on McCord Field. Major Liam Chun typed furiously, running a counterattack algorithm through the Joint Force Network. "We can't stop it conventionally. I'm trying an EMP override on the missile's guidance now." The feed went black. For 10 heart-stopping seconds, the base held its breath. Then, the missile altered course at the last second, scraping the edge of the city, leaving a massive plume of smoke and destruction, but sparing the hangars. Chin slumped, shaking. "Too close," he muttered. On the East Coast, New York City faced sabotage from within. Cyber attacks shut down subways, traffic lights, and emergency response networks simultaneously. Emergency personnel struggled to reach areas under attack. Private Security Officer Marcus Holt ran through flooded streets, dodging overturned cars and sparks from exposed electrical lines. Gunfire cracked from nearby alleys. Hostile forces, likely trained infiltrators, were taking advantage of the chaos. Holt realized that every city, every transport hub, every critical node had a target. By nightfall, the domino effect was unmistakable. Power grids crippled from coast to coast. Communications partially offline, including emergency channels. Critical military installations under siege or unable to respond fully. Civilians trapped in chaos, desperate for information, aid, and protection. In a war room bunker beneath the Pentagon, General Harlow stared at the maps, red pins multiplying across the country. He muttered under his breath, "They've landed, they're inside, and they're not leaving without a fight." In living rooms across the nation, Americans watched smoke rise over cities they had thought untouchable. For the first time in generations, the homeland was a battlefield. Chapter 4. The Homeland Breached. The morning fog over Los Angeles harbor was thick, hiding the silhouettes of enemy amphibious assault ships. Radar and satellite imagery had already confirmed their approach hours earlier, but the civilian command structures had been crippled by cyber attacks, and the local National Guard was spread thin. Lieutenant Jenna Morales, still on the waterfront from the first strike, saw dark shapes sliding into the water. Hovercrafts carrying mechanized infantry and armored vehicles cut through the surf with terrifying speed. Artillery fire from shore attempted to repel them, but prepositioned coastal batteries had been disabled by prior sabotage. "They're here," Morales radioed, voice tight with tension. "Open fire, but expect heavy losses. We're outnumbered." Meanwhile, on the East Coast, the port of Miami faced a simultaneous attack. Russian and Chinese naval task forces had coordinated the landing of mechanized units, while stealth helicopters deployed special operations troops behind defensive lines. Civilians fled in panic as highways jammed with traffic. Military units scrambled, but many were cut off by flooded roads and electronic interference in communications. Colonel David Rains of the 7th Infantry, stationed at Fort Lauderdale, barked orders: "Defend the highways, hold the bridges. No one gets through without a fight." Yet, even as his troops mobilized, enemy paratroopers landed under the cover of anti-aircraft fire, striking key intersections and command posts. Across the Midwest, the initial missile and cyber attacks had knocked out most radar installations. Enemy mechanized units crossed the northern border via Minnesota and North Dakota, supported by airborne drops. In rural towns, National Guard units engaged small enemy contingents, but supply lines were strained and reinforcements delayed. Private First Class Aaron Klein, part of a Minnesota National Guard squad, described the scene later. "It felt like the whole world had turned upside down. One minute we were on training exercises, the next we were facing tanks and helicopters we didn't even know were coming. The town was burning within hours." Washington, D.C., the nerve center of U.S. command, was under threat but not yet breached. Intelligence indicated enemy airborne units were attempting to infiltrate from multiple directions. General Harlow convened a hasty defense. "We can't let them take the capital. Deploy quick reaction forces along every northern and southern approach. Air Force strike wings are cleared for intercepts, but expect severe interference. They've jammed our radar and comms." Yet even as defenses were mobilized, hackers embedded in civilian networks were disabling power, cutting traffic lights, and spreading chaos. By nightfall, the picture was clear. California's ports and key infrastructure were partially under enemy control. Florida faced massive urban combat and civilian evacuations, with mechanized enemy units advancing inland. Northern and Midwest states reported border incursions, cutting off supply chains. Major cities were experiencing panic, fires, and breakdowns of law and order, with civilians caught between invasion forces and U.S. defenders. Morales and her remaining squad huddled behind a wrecked crane in Los Angeles harbor. Her radio crackled with static as she transmitted a single line: "We're holding for now, but this is only the beginning." Somewhere over the Pacific, enemy aircraft carriers continued their approach. The main invasion force was still en route, bringing additional troops, tanks, and aircraft. The United States, once thought untouchable on its own soil, had been breached. And the full scope of the conflict, the fight for the very homeland, was just beginning. Chapter 5. Occupation and Resistance. By the third week of the invasion, much of the U.S. coastline was under partial or full control of foreign forces. Cities once considered untouchable had become occupied zones. Los Angeles, Miami, and Seattle were smoldering reminders that no part of the homeland was safe. In Los Angeles, Morales' unit had been reduced to a handful of surviving Navy SEALs and National Guard reinforcements. Enemy mechanized patrols and armored convoys controlled the harbor and major road arteries. Yet small groups of defenders, military personnel, ex-law enforcement officers, and civilians had begun to form resistance cells. "We can't hold the ports, but we can hit supply lines," Morales said during a covert briefing. "Sabotage ambushes, intel gathering. We disrupt their operations and give our forces a fighting chance." Their first strike was surgical. A fuel depot feeding enemy tanks was destroyed using improvised charges, sending columns of black smoke into the sky. Enemy reinforcements responded with drone surveillance, forcing Morales' team to disappear into the city's underground tunnels. In Miami, civilian resistance emerged spontaneously. Former police officers, construction workers, and even retirees scavenged weapons and coordinated patrols. Using knowledge of the city layout, they staged hit-and-run attacks against convoys, sabotaged bridges, and targeted supply caches. Sergeant Elena Vasquez, a veteran of U.S. Army Special Forces now leading a mixed civilian-military unit, described it, "They think they've taken the city, but every shipment they move, every patrol they send out, we're watching. We're here, and we're not going anywhere quietly." Cyber warfare remained a crucial front. From hidden apartments and basements, U.S. hackers, some formerly in the government, some independent, targeted enemy communications. Radio networks, surveillance feeds, and local drones were intermittently disabled, giving pockets of resistance a tactical advantage. Claire Donovan, the intelligence analyst who had warned of destabilization weeks before, now coordinated these operations from a makeshift command hub. "We're ghosts in their networks," she said. "Every disrupted feed, every false report buys lives." Outside the major cities, rural and suburban areas became battlegrounds of attrition. Small National Guard units, reinforced by civilian militias, ambushed armored columns moving inland. Supply convoys were attacked on highways and rail lines, forcing enemy forces to rely on slower, more vulnerable supply chains. Private Aaron Klein, still in Minnesota, recounted one skirmish. "We had 5 trucks coming down the highway. We hit them with everything we had, Molotovs, RPGs, small arms. Only 2 got through and they were late. It wasn't much, but it kept them off balance." In Washington, D.C., the capital had not fallen but was under constant threat. Strategic relocations of government officials and command centers kept the U.S. leadership intact, but intelligence indicated that airborne enemy forces were planning another strike. General Harlow issued strict orders. "We defend at all costs, but we cannot risk the city being destroyed. Prepare mobile units, coordinate with resistance cells in nearby states, and maintain communication integrity." The U.S. military and civilian resistance networks were forming a shadow war, one where every victory was measured in disruption rather than territory. The occupation had begun, but it was far from complete. As night fell over the smoldering cities, Morales crouched in a ruined warehouse, listening to the distant hum of enemy vehicles. She checked her radio, hearing whispers of coordinated attacks across multiple occupied zones. "They think they've won," she murmured. "They have no idea we've only just begun." Somewhere in the Midwest, across the forests and plains, guerrilla bands were moving, sharing intel and sabotaging enemy convoys. Across the country, the flame of resistance was igniting. The U.S. was invaded, yes, but the fight for liberation had already started. Chapter 6. The Counterattack. The dawn over Seattle was tense, gray clouds hanging low as if mirroring the uncertainty in the city. After weeks of occupation, small pockets of resistance had begun consolidating with remaining U.S. military units. Supplies were scarce, but intelligence gathered from civilian networks and captured enemy communications revealed exploitable weaknesses. Brigadier General Marcus Harlow convened a meeting with the remaining regional commanders via a secure satellite uplink. Maps sprawled across screens showed enemy positions, supply lines, and urban strongholds. "We've absorbed the initial shock," Harlow began, voice calm but steel-edged. "Now it's time to strike back. Our objective is to disrupt their logistics, reclaim key infrastructure, and regain momentum. Civilian resistance cells will be integrated with conventional units. This is not a raid. It's the start of a systematic counterattack." West Coast operations. In Los Angeles, Morales' SEAL team coordinated with local resistance fighters to attack enemy supply routes. Using abandoned subway tunnels and prepositioned safe houses, they launched nightly raids on convoys, ambushing armored vehicles with RPGs and improvised explosives. One night, Morales radioed General Harlow from a hidden command post. "Convoy intercepted near the port. 2 tanks disabled. Fuel shipment destroyed. Enemy morale visibly shaken. We need reinforcements to maintain pressure." Air support, long grounded by early cyber attacks, was now partially restored. F-35s and H-64 Apache helicopters conducted precision strikes, coordinated by resistance cells relaying real-time targeting data. The synergy of guerrilla tactics and conventional air power became a force multiplier. Eastern Theater. In Miami and along Florida's northern corridor, Colonel Elena Vasquez led a combined operation with National Guard units and guerrilla forces. Their objective: retake major intersections and secure the airport for further U.S. troop landings. "This is more than defense," Vasquez said. "It's the first step toward reclaiming the state." Enemy forces, unprepared for sustained insurgent-style attrition, struggled to maintain control over urban centers. Civilians supplied intelligence, mapped enemy patrol patterns, and provided safe houses, creating a decentralized yet coordinated resistance network. Midwest and Northern Fronts. In Minnesota, Private Aaron Klein's guerrilla band evolved into a formalized militia unit integrated into regional command. Using hit-and-run tactics, they delayed enemy armored movements, disrupted supply convoys, and provided vital intelligence for aerial strikes. Klein described the transformation. "We went from scared civilians dodging tanks to a network that could predict and disrupt enemy operations. Every successful ambush, every convoy we delayed, brought hope back to the region." Cyber warfare countermeasures. Claire Donovan and her team had finally restored a functional cyber command network. Through coordinated strikes, they disrupted enemy drone feeds, manipulated logistics databases, and created digital ghosts that sowed confusion among occupying forces. Enemy reinforcements were misdirected, and their communications were unreliable, giving U.S. forces a critical edge. "For the first time, we're not just reacting," Donovan said. "We're controlling the battlefield." Strategic gains. Within a week of coordinated counterattacks, several coastal cities regained partial control, forcing enemy troops into defensive positions. Supply chains were heavily disrupted, reducing enemy operational effectiveness. Resistance networks multiplied, linking urban guerrilla units with conventional forces. Air and cyber superiority slowly returned, allowing precision strikes against high-value targets. General Harlow assessed the progress. "This is only the beginning, but the tide is turning. Our homeland is still under threat, but now we fight on our terms." As night fell, Morales surveyed Los Angeles from a rooftop overlooking the harbor. Smoke still rose from enemy positions, but the streets below were no longer silent. Small pockets of American forces, joined by civilians, moved through the city with purpose. "We've taken the first step back," Morales said quietly, eyes scanning the horizon. "And we're not stopping." Across the U.S., a fragmented nation was coming together, using every available resource to reclaim its cities, its people, and its freedom. Chapter 7. The Endgame. The world had changed. Months of invasion, occupation, and counterattacks had transformed the United States into a fractured battlefield. Cities smoldered, infrastructure was devastated, and both military and civilian casualties had mounted into the hundreds of thousands. Yet the U.S. had survived, and was now fighting back with a vengeance. Strategic overview. In the Pacific, U.S. carrier strike groups had regained operational readiness, establishing air superiority over key maritime approaches. Amphibious landings from surviving enemy task forces had been slowed, their supply lines harried by guerrilla fighters, cyber disruptions, and targeted airstrikes. On the East Coast, recaptured ports allowed for the re-entry of conventional forces. Urban combat in Miami, New York, and Boston had pushed the enemy back from central districts, though pockets of resistance continued to hold. Across Europe, NATO forces pressed a counteroffensive against Russian and Chinese units, opening a multi-front pressure that threatened to collapse their extended lines. The nuclear question. From the Kremlin and Beijing, whispers of nuclear escalation grew. Satellite imagery confirmed that multiple nuclear assets were on high alert. President Grant and General Harlow convened a secure underground war council. "We cannot allow them to escalate," Grant said firmly. "But we cannot back down either. Any misstep and the world ends." Claire Donovan, leading cyber operations, proposed a daring strategy. A coordinated global cyber strike to disrupt enemy nuclear command and control systems without actually triggering warheads. "We can blind them," she said. "Make their systems think the U.S. is already retaliating, force them to stand down or risk mutual destruction." Harlow nodded. "If this works, we avoid nuclear war and maintain strategic advantage. If it fails, the consequences are catastrophic." The final offensive. Morales' team in Los Angeles had received orders for the largest coordinated strike since the counterattack began. American forces, supported by urban guerrilla cells, would retake the harbor and surrounding industrial zones, cutting off the enemy's last resupply route. Simultaneously, in Miami, Colonel Vasquez and her units launched a double-pronged assault to reclaim the airport and secure the city center. Coordinated airstrikes, precision artillery, and resistance intelligence allowed them to overwhelm entrenched enemy positions. In the Midwest, guerrilla forces guided U.S. armored units through the forests and plains, ambushing retreating enemy mechanized columns. Each successful engagement forced the invaders further back toward the coasts. Brinkmanship and diplomacy. In the halls of the United Nations, emergency sessions convened. Key neutral nations brokered back-channel talks, warning that further escalation could trigger a nuclear holocaust. President Grant and her international counterparts maintained a delicate balance. Pressure the enemy militarily while buying time to prevent global catastrophe. Donovan's cyber operations achieved their goal. Enemy nuclear command systems experienced false alerts, internal conflicts, and communication blackouts. Misinterpretation of American intentions led Moscow and Beijing to stand down strategic nuclear forces, buying crucial hours for the counterattack to succeed. Victory, but at a cost. By the final week, the combined counteroffensive had pushed enemy forces off nearly all U.S. soil. Major cities were liberated, but at tremendous cost. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins, millions of civilians were displaced, and critical infrastructure had been destroyed. Morales surveyed the Los Angeles harbor once more. Smoke still lingered from the last enemy positions, but American flags flew over key buildings. "We won," she said softly. "But the price, it's unimaginable." President Grant addressed the nation, her voice solemn but resolute. "The United States has endured the unthinkable. We have defended our homeland, reclaimed our cities, and shown that freedom cannot be conquered. But the work of rebuilding, of healing, has only just begun. Let us never forget the sacrifices made, and let us never again take peace for granted." Epilogue. A fragile peace. Across the globe, the war left scars on every nation involved. Alliances had shifted, economies were shattered, and trust between superpowers was at a historic low. But for the United States, the invasion had forged a renewed resilience. Morales, Vasquez, Klein, and Donovan, ordinary Americans thrust into extraordinary circumstances, stood among ruins and reconstruction crews, watching a new day rise over a battered but unbroken homeland. The war was over, but its lessons would linger for generations. Vigilance, unity, and the human capacity to endure even when the world itself seemed to crumble. Epilogue. Aftermath and reconstruction. The war had ended, but the world was forever changed. Cities across the United States bore the scars of the invasion. Charred streets, collapsed bridges, and shattered neighborhoods. In Los Angeles, Morales walked along the harbor, now filled with reconstruction crews and engineers clearing debris. The smell of smoke had faded, replaced by dust and the hum of heavy machinery. "It's going to take years," she said quietly to Vasquez, who was coordinating volunteer reinforcements. "Years," Vasquez agreed. "But we'll rebuild. That's the point. We survive, we rebuild, and we prepare for the future." Rebuilding the homeland. President Grant's administration launched an unprecedented domestic mobilization. Federal, state, and local agencies collaborated with private contractors to restore infrastructure, power grids, water systems, highways, and hospitals. Emergency housing was provided for displaced citizens, while surviving military units helped restore law and order in liberated cities. Cybersecurity became a top priority. Claire Donovan led a permanent national cyber defense network, tasked with ensuring that no foreign power could paralyze the U.S. again. Lessons learned during the invasion informed new protocols, rapid response teams, and hardened communications across the nation. Military reorganization. The U.S. Armed Forces underwent a complete restructuring. Urban combat, asymmetric warfare, and homeland defense were now central to strategic planning. The lessons of guerrilla resistance were codified into training for conventional units, and collaboration with civilian volunteers became a key doctrine. Morales and Vasquez were both promoted to command positions, their experience invaluable in shaping the next generation of U.S. defense strategy. Klein returned to Minnesota to train regional militia units, blending local knowledge with military tactics. Political and global realignment. The war reshaped international relations. China and Russia, chastened by the failure of their invasion, faced internal political upheaval and economic sanctions from the global community. Neutral nations emerged as critical mediators, insisting on treaties to prevent future large-scale conflicts. NATO alliances were strengthened, but the organization redefined its strategic focus to emphasize rapid response and collective homeland defense. Diplomatic channels were reopened cautiously, emphasizing transparency and mutual accountability. Economic recovery. The U.S. economy, initially crippled by cyber attacks and disrupted supply chains, began a slow but steady recovery. Reconstruction efforts created millions of jobs, while domestic manufacturing surged to replace destroyed infrastructure. International trade resumed under strict cybersecurity and logistical protocols, with lessons from wartime supply vulnerabilities integrated into policy. Societal impact. The invasion left deep psychological scars. Millions of Americans had witnessed death, destruction, and displacement. Counseling programs, survivor networks, and national memorials were established to honor those lost. Schools incorporated lessons on resilience, civic responsibility, and emergency preparedness. Yet amidst the grief, a sense of national unity emerged. Ordinary citizens who had taken part in resistance efforts became local heroes, inspiring a generation to understand that freedom required vigilance and courage. Technological transformation. The war accelerated advancements in military and civilian technology. Drones, cyber defense systems, and rapid deployment logistics networks became standard. Space-based surveillance and early warning satellites were expanded, ensuring that no future surprise attack could threaten the homeland with the same level of effectiveness. Personal reflections. Morales, standing atop a partially rebuilt pier, watched ships return to the harbor under American flags. She reflected on the lives lost, the battles fought, and the resilience of her country. "We survived the impossible," she whispered. "But survival is only the first step. We must remain vigilant, united, and ready. For peace is fragile, and freedom is never guaranteed." Vasquez joined her, scanning the horizon. "The world will remember this war," she said. and they'll remember what it took to defend the homeland. But we also have a choice to rebuild better, stronger, and smarter. That's our real victory. Closing thoughts. World War III had tested the United States in ways previously unimaginable. The invasion had exposed vulnerabilities, but it had also revealed the extraordinary capacity of ordinary citizens and soldiers to resist, adapt, and ultimately prevail. The country emerged battered but unbroken. Cities were rebuilt, alliances reshaped, and a new era of vigilance dawned. The scars of war would never fully fade, but the lessons endured. Preparation, unity, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. For the United States, the invasion was no longer just a memory of destruction. It became the foundation of a renewed national identity, forged in fire and tempered by courage.